this landmark experiment in 1887, a little over 100 years ago. It was called the Michelson-Morley experiment, and it was designed to solve the mystery and end the controversy that was raging in the scientific community in the late 1800s. Is there a field of energy that connects everything, or is that the idea that it exists, is that false? And at that time, this field was called the ether. And I'll let our listeners know, if you want to get laughed off of a scientific stage really fast today, you can bring up the term the ether. Because even today, even though we know the field is there, that term is not accepted as a valid description of the field. But the bottom line to this experiment is it was believed that the field is in motion. So if the motion could be detected, it would prove the existence of the field. This would be akin to our listeners if you were to go outside and moisten a finger and hold it above your head right now, and if you felt no wind blowing against your finger, you concluded that no air exists. Of course, that's a false conclusion. Just because the wind isn't moving doesn't mean that the air doesn't exist. But this is the equivalent of the thinking behind this field in 1887. Well, from that time forward, even in the textbooks, if your kids are in school today, or those of you listening in school, if your textbooks will not acknowledge the existence of this field, even today, and it has been the great stumbling block that has prevented us from unifying the four forces of nature, the unified field theory that allows us to move forward in physics and solve some of the great mysteries in the universe. And so this field, there are ways not to measure it directly, but rather indirectly. They say if the field exists, then we should see these kinds of results, and they're seeing precisely these kinds of results.
Why, Gregg, without training, do some of us believe it exists?
That is a good question. I think it's the way we're wired, George. Some of us were fortunate enough to be raised in families that were either accepting or open-minded enough, or, America is called the great melting pot of the world. We have cultural and spiritual traditions that converge here from many different parts of the world beyond the Western mindset, and they bring with them the ideas, the very basic idea that everything is connected. The Aboriginal traditions in Australia are some of the oldest documented continuous lineage of spirituality that we have in the world today. By some anthropological estimates, they go back over 50,000 years. For 50,000 years, their story has never changed. And they say that the world began with the existence of a web or a net of energy upon which everything is built. The Hindu traditions say the same thing. The great god Indra wove this web. It's called the abode of Indra. A very non-scientific language describing precisely what it is that we're finding today. So it may be that many of us were simply raised in families and cultures that acknowledge this. I'm just going to share an interesting story. The reason I'm sharing the story is by the end of that program, people came out of the woodwork who I had worked with for years, day in and day out, and they said, Gregg, I never knew that you believe this way. I believe this way. My family believes this way. I was raised this way, and they never really felt safe talking about it in that culture. And I'm not singling that culture out as my experience, but I think it's true in much of our corporate culture today. So I think there's probably much more willingness in the broad general public to accept what our own science is showing us, because there's a sense within all of us that it exists anyway. I think that's why we're drawn to the kinds of movies like The Matrix. We just saw The Golden Compass last night about parallel universes, and The Last Memsy. These kinds of movies, we're drawn to see those because they do touch something very, very deep within us.
Well, as you work in your DVD, The Science of Miracles,
to go back, once the camaraderie was established with the monks and the nuns and the abbots, there was a trust that was created, and in that trust, they were willing to take us places and show us the libraries. Some of these libraries, George, are 1,500 years old, that have the texts that describe in written terms the practices that they are still using in these places today. And these are the practices that we went to first to see if they really exist, secondly, to document them, and third, to integrate them into what I'm sharing through our work and with our listeners tonight.
I am really fascinated with your work about some of these ancient texts that somehow have been lost from us. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. We said early in the program that the fact, and it is now a fact, that there is a universal essence that connects us and everything in our world, and it is a fact that we can create experiences in our bodies, specifically in our heart. And I'm going to talk about why that's important in just a minute.
Sure.
But we can create those experiences in our heart that communicate directly with this field. George, when we're talking, this sounds like science fiction stuff, but it literally allows us to interrupt the flow of space and time and rearrange the stuff our world is made of. And this is the power that we are born with in this world. It's an understanding that sounds so foreign to the Western mindset and to our way of thinking, yet it's so deeply entrenched in the indigenous, the native, as well as the ancient spiritual traditions throughout the world, including the early Christian and pre-Christian and Jewish traditions before those texts were edited or completely removed in the case of the Western Bible in the 4th century during the time of the Emperor Constantine. So one of the things that a lot of people, we hear about the biblical edits, and if anyone's read, the Da Vinci Code, I haven't. I'm probably the only person that has not read
Really?
the Da Vinci Code, but I understand they talk about those edits. And a lot of people believe this happened only in the Christian Bible. The Jewish Bible, beyond the Torah, was edited as well. The Torah, the first 5 books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those are intact. And the additional books that were canonized as the Jewish scripture, they were edited as well. Excuse me, and we know that these texts were edited because we have found the evidence of those edits in places like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic libraries, and in Cairo we've documented those Coptic libraries, and in the libraries of these monasteries in the Egyptian mountains. We find them in South America, in Bolivia and Peru, in the monasteries there, and we find them in the best preserved records in the highlands of central China and Tibet. And it appears, now the first time I had the opportunity to take one of these pilgrimages was 1998. And the monks that were there, they told us, they said that after the crucifixion of Jesus, that the followers were persecuted, and they fled the Holy Lands, and they went to 4 key locations. Now, this is a little 14-year-old monk telling me this through the translator. He's saying they went to 4 key locations, and in each of those locations they carried copies of the same records, the same texts, that are essentially the equivalent of the Dead Sea Scrolls that we find today. One of those places was into the mountains of Egypt. One of those was in what we now know is the Tibetan Plateau in China. One of those places was in the southern, right along the southern border between Bolivia and Peru, and we've seen the monasteries there. And one of those places was right here in North America, in parts of south central North America, in areas of Kentucky and Tennessee. And believe it or not, some of those texts have actually been found and documented in those areas as well.
Well, are these texts, are they training guides, instruction sheets? What are they?
They're written in ancient Greek, Coptic, and Aramaic. In the Aramaic language, we get a lot of questions about this. The way that we can use the English alphabet and write Spanish or French words. The Aramaic alphabet, they are Hebrew letters that are used to create the Aramaic alphabet. They've been found. There are even records. I don't know. You may have heard about this, George. They found an abbreviated copy of the Ten Commandments carved in a 2,000-year-old stone on a reservation just south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. In both Greek and Hebrew letters. And the question is, who knew Greek and Hebrew in North America 2,000 years ago? And
exactly.
How did that get there? So the records appear to have been from a central wisdom, a common wisdom, a lineage. And after the crucifixion, that lineage of wisdom was dispersed, and we're now finding evidence of it in different places, but they're all saying essentially the same thing.